All right, so you ready to like jump headfirst into the crypto world?
Let's do it.
Today, we're going to tackle this question that I feel like has been around since Bitcoin first popped up.
Yeah.
Can it really become like a mainstream currency, like that
Yeah.
we use every day?
The $1,000,000 question, right?
Yeah, and we've got these analyses from motleyfoolcrypto.com, Investopedia, and NYDIG to help us kind of like sift through it all.
Yeah, tease out.
Yeah, and figure out like what actually gives Bitcoin value.
Exactly. It's a question that really makes you rethink how we think about value.
Right.
Because with Bitcoin, we're dealing with something that's intangible. It's purely digital.
It's like it doesn't exist in the real world.
Right, exactly.
There's no like physical thing you could hold.
No government backing it or anything.
Yeah, but somehow it's like commanding all this attention and like money globally.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So to like get us started, I think it's good to go back to the basics, like what even makes something money, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of these sources actually use this framework. Like they look at those classic characteristics of money.
Right.
So durability, portability, divisibility, fungibility, scarcity, and then acceptability.
Yes, those fundamental qualities that determine whether something can actually function as like a medium of exchange, a store of value.
Right, like can you actually use it to buy stuff? And will it hold its value over time?
Exactly.
Now let's start with durability. Like how tough is this thing?
Okay.
The Bitcoin blockchain, it's got this like 99.99% uptime since it started, which is kind of crazy when you think about like how often our regular financial systems like go down.
Yeah, it's a point that a lot of Bitcoin proponents really emphasize.
Well, yeah.
That like decentralized structure spread across so many computers, it makes it really, really difficult to like shut it down or corrupt it.
So it's like this really resilient system.
Right. It speaks to that security that draws a lot of people to Bitcoin in the first place.
So it's like digital gold in a way.
In a way, yeah. Yeah.
But way more portable. Because think about it with Bitcoin, your wealth is basically just like a private key. This string of code that you could theoretically just store in your head.
Yeah, you're not carrying around like bulky gold bars or stacks of cash.
It's like transferring value at the speed of thought. It's crazy.
Right. And it can cross any border.
But speaking of gold, it's scarce too, right? So like what makes Bitcoin scarcity different?
That's a great point. So gold, yeah, it's scarce, but governments can always mine more or, discover new reserves.
They can just decide to print more money.
Exactly. With Bitcoin, that scarcity is like built in. It's
And
absolute
keeps it
21 million coins. That's it.
Which is a really appealing idea to people who are worried about inflation and like governments just printing money whenever they want.
Yeah, it creates this sense of like a finite supply, which is very different from our current system.
But does that automatically make it money?
Well, that's the debate, right? Like Investopedia points out that even if it has all these characteristics, widespread acceptance is still a major hurdle.
Because if you can't use it to buy groceries or pay your rent,
Right.
is it really functioning as money?
Yeah. And some argue that its volatility also prevents it from being a reliable store of value.
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster ride with the price.
It is. And that's a big debate within the crypto space, that volatility, it's a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, it creates opportunities for speculation and, those like rapid gains that people talk about.
Get rich quick stories.
Exactly. But it also creates a lot of uncertainty, and that makes it difficult for Bitcoin to gain traction as like a stable everyday currency.
Right, because who wants to pay for their coffee with something that might be worth half as much tomorrow?
Right, exactly. It's a tough one.
And then there's the whole supply and demand thing, like basic economics. Motley Fool really hits on this.
Supply and demand, yeah, it's fundamental.
So when demand is higher, then supply prices go up. We saw that in 2021 when all those big institutional investors jumped in.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild time.
Drove up demand, sent prices skyrocketing.
It was a classic example of how market forces can impact Bitcoin's value. Those large-scale buying sprees made the existing Bitcoin even more scarce.
So it just feeds into that whole narrative of like finite supply, future value going up.
Exactly. And it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Like the more people believe it's going to be valuable, the more they buy, which pushes the price up even more.
Exactly. And we see this with other cryptocurrencies too. Like Ethereum's increasing use in DeFi applications has driven up the demand for Ether.
So it's not just Bitcoin that's affected by this.
No, it's a dynamic that plays out across the entire crypto market.
But is it all just speculation, or is there something more like fundamental going on?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Motley Fool brings up this interesting point about the cost of production,
Okay.
highlighting how mining that energy-intensive process
Yeah.
actually creates a sort of price floor.
Because miners have to pay for all that electricity.
Exactly. And as more miners compete, the difficulty increases, pushing up the cost of mining.
So Bitcoin needs to be valuable enough to make mining profitable.
Right. It's this fascinating feedback loop between the real-world cost of energy and the digital value of Bitcoin.
So if the price drops too low, mining becomes a bad deal and potentially reduces supply, which could push the price back up.
Yeah, it's a complex system for sure. But of course, this raises concerns about the environmental
Oh,
impact.
yeah, the sustainability question.
Can a system that uses so much energy ever be truly sustainable?
And if not, does that hurt its long-term chances?
These are questions that developers are actively working on, exploring things like renewable energy sources and more efficient mining algorithms.
It's definitely a hot topic in the crypto world.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big point of contention.
And that leads us to another area that could have a huge impact, the world of exchanges and competition.
Right.
The more exchanges Bitcoin is listed on, the more people can access it,
Yeah, it increases accessibility.
which could drive up demand.
Absolutely. Because it makes it easier for people to buy, sell, and trade Bitcoin.
But as Motley Fool points out, Bitcoin isn't the only game in town anymore.
No, not at all.
New cryptocurrencies are popping up all the time.
All the time.
Each one's trying to grab attention and investment.
They're all vying for that top spot.
And if a new project comes along and it offers like faster transactions, lower fees, or solves a problem better,
It could definitely gain value at Bitcoin's expense.
it's like survival of the fittest, but in the digital world.
It really is. This constant competition is actually a major driver of innovation in the crypto space.
Which is good for everyone, right?
In theory,
But even with all this innovation, we can't ignore the big elephant in the room.
regulation.
How governments decide to regulate crypto is going to have a massive impact on Bitcoin's future.
Absolutely. Clarity around regulation could boost confidence among investors, lead to more mainstream financial products, and potentially increase demand.
But the opposite is true too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Unfavorable regulations could stifle innovation and send prices plummeting.
It's like this big unknown.
It's a wild card for sure. Will governments embrace this whole decentralized thing, or will they try to control it?
And that uncertainty definitely contributes to the market's volatility.
Definitely. And that brings us to another really crucial element, the human factor.
Right, the psychology of it all.
Exactly.
Investopedia talks about greed and FOMO.
Fear of missing out, classic.
When you see those headlines about Bitcoin going through the roof, it's tempting to just jump in.
Even if you don't really understand what you're buying.
Yeah, you just don't want to be left behind.
Right. It's a classic example of how emotions influence financial decisions.
But then you've got those long-term investors who genuinely believe in Bitcoin's potential.
Yeah, for them, it's not about quick profits. It's about supporting a technology they think could change the world.
It's about challenging the system.
Exactly. They see it as a way to empower individuals and create a fairer financial system.
So there are all these different motivations swirling around.
It's a mix of technological innovation, market forces, human psychology.
It's kind of a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It's a complex and dynamic system.
And we haven't even touched on this whole question of copying Bitcoin.
NYDIG brings up this fascinating question. Could someone just clone Bitcoin's code and have that new coin be just as valuable?
Yeah, like could you just copy and paste to make Bitcoin 2.0?
That's where things get even more interesting. And we'll dive into that next time. But first, let's take a closer look at how this human element plays out, especially when it comes to market sentiment and that whole fear of missing out.
Yeah, let's explore that psychological side a bit more.
It's a wild ride, for sure.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after the break. So we were just talking about this whole human element, right? Like the psychology behind investing.
Yeah, it's a huge factor.
And Crypto.com, they really emphasize the need to do your research. Like, don't just jump in head first.
Yeah, definitely don't fall for those get-rich-quick schemes.
Because past performance, it doesn't guarantee future returns, especially with something as volatile as crypto.
It's a crucial point. It's so easy to get swept up in the hype when you see people bragging about making a fortune off Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. But you mentioned earlier that some people see Bitcoin as part of a bigger movement, right? Like towards decentralization and financial freedom.
Absolutely. For a lot of people, it's about taking control away from governments and central banks.
So putting the power back in the hands of individuals.
Exactly. They believe it could create a more equitable financial system, a system that's more inclusive, especially for those who don't have easy access to traditional banking.
It's like a whole new way of thinking about money.
It really is. It's about challenging the established order and opting out of a system that many see as rigged against them.
Like a financial revolution.
In a way, yeah. There's a strong ideological component to this movement that shouldn't be ignored.
It's like the early days of the internet, this sense of possibility and disruption.
Exactly. There are a lot of parallels there.
But just like the internet, Bitcoin faces its own challenges, right?
Right.
Scalability and usability. If it's going to become mainstream, it needs to be able to handle way more transactions.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the biggest hurdles for Bitcoin to overcome.
Because as more people use it, the network gets clogged, and then transactions take longer and fees go up.
Exactly. And that's where solutions like the Lightning Network come in.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that before. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. Think of it as a layer 2 solution built on top of the main Bitcoin blockchain. It allows for much faster and cheaper transactions by creating these off-chain payment channels.
So it's like a side road that bypasses the main highway.
Exactly. Instead of every single transaction being recorded on the main blockchain, these smaller transactions happen off to the side, making the whole system more efficient.
It's like creating an express lane.
Right. The Lightning Network is still under development, but it holds a lot of promise for making Bitcoin more practical for everyday use.
That's really interesting. So we've got these efforts to improve the technology, this ideological movement towards decentralization, and then this crazy market driven by speculation and FOMO.
It's like a perfect storm of factors.
And then we haven't even talked about the possibility of copying Bitcoin.
Right. NYDB Duty brings up this really intriguing question. If someone just copied Bitcoin's code, would that new coin be just as valuable?
It seems like you could just copy and paste and create like Bitcoin 2.0, right?
It's not quite that simple. It's like saying, if I copy the recipe for Coca-Cola, will my drink be just as popular?
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's not just about the ingredients. It's about the brand, the reputation, the network effects that have been built up over time.
So with Bitcoin, it's not just the code itself. It's the whole network, the history of transactions, the community, the infrastructure.
Exactly. Bitcoin's been around for over a decade. It's been tested. It's proven its resilience. It's survived crashes and attacks. That history, that credibility is baked into its value. A new coin wouldn't have that.
It's like a brand new startup versus a company that's been around for 100 years.
Right. The startup might have a great product, but it doesn't have that same legacy of trust and success.
So it's about more than just the technology.
Definitely. It's about trust, adoption, and time. You can't just create a new currency and declare it valuable. It has to earn that value.
And speaking of time, the clock is ticking on Bitcoin's limited supply. Only 21 million coins will ever exist.
Right.
What happens when demand keeps growing, but the supply is fixed?
It's a scenario that a lot of Bitcoin proponents believe in. That scarcity will drive the price up as more people adopt it.
So the price just keeps going up and up.
Potentially, yeah. But it also raises some questions about practicality. If a single Bitcoin is worth millions of dollars, how do you actually use it for everyday purchases?
Would you buy a cup of coffee with like a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin?
That's where divisibility comes in. Bitcoin can be divided down to 8 decimal places, those tiny units called satoshis.
Right, so maybe we'll be talking about satoshis instead of Bitcoins.
It's definitely a possibility. It challenges our traditional ideas about money, but it also opens up new possibilities.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. It forces us to reimagine the future of finance.
So we've got these efforts to improve the technology, this ideological movement, this wild market, and then this whole question of limited supply. It's a lot to process.
It really is. Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency. It's a technological innovation, a social movement, and a financial experiment all in one.
And it seems like we're just at the beginning of this experiment.
We are. It's still early days.
So what's next for Bitcoin? What are the key things to watch for as this technology keeps evolving?
That's the big question, isn't
Okay,
it?
so we're at this like crossroads with Bitcoin,
Yeah.
where we see this like potential for it to become mainstream, but also these like inherent limitations.
Right. It's a balancing act between that revolutionary potential and the need for practical solutions that people can actually use.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoin and how that could drive the price up as demand increases. But what happens when a single Bitcoin is worth like millions of dollars? Does it even make sense to like buy groceries with it?
Well, some people believe that as Bitcoin's value rises, we'll just shift to using those smaller units like satoshis for those everyday transactions.
So instead of like buying a coffee for 0.001 Bitcoin, it'll be like 10,000 satoshis or something.
Right, exactly. It might sound strange now, but remember, our current systems are based on similar subdivisions. We think in terms of dollars and cents, not like hundreds of thousands of individual pennies.
Yeah, it's all about how we perceive value. But wouldn't that create a whole new set of challenges? Like, would we need entirely new systems to handle all those tiny transactions?
That's a valid point. The current financial infrastructure isn't really built to handle transactions at that scale. It would require some serious innovation from payment processors, merchants, even consumers.
So there's this like technological hurdle, even if Bitcoin reaches those crazy price levels.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's like zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. What are some of the key things to watch for as this technology keeps evolving?
Well, regulatory developments are going to be huge. How governments choose to regulate crypto is going to have a massive impact on everything: adoption, innovation, market dynamics, you name it.
Right. We've already seen governments take all sorts of different approaches. Some are embracing crypto, some are trying to shut it down.
Yeah.
It's hard to predict what's going to happen.
It really is. It's a constantly evolving landscape. Another key area to watch is technological innovation. We've talked about the Lightning Network, but there are tons of other projects out there working on scalability, security, usability, you name it.
It's like this constant arms race to stay ahead of the curve.
It really is, both technologically and in terms of adapting to those ever-changing regulations.
And then there's the human element. How will public perception change as Bitcoin becomes more mainstream?
Right. Will people start to see it as a legitimate form of money, or will they remain skeptical?
Will it be as normal as using a credit card, or will it stay something that only tech enthusiasts use?
It's hard to say, but one thing's for sure. The future of Bitcoin, its value, its role in the world, it's not set in stone. It's being shaped right now by all these forces, technology markets, regulations, human behavior.
It's like we're all part of this big experiment, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting and unpredictable. There are no easy answers, no guarantees, but by understanding these underlying factors, we can at least try to navigate this crazy world and make informed decisions.
So if you had to give our listeners like one key takeaway, what would it be?
I'd say stay curious. Keep learning and approach this whole space with a critical but open mind. Don't buy into the hype or let fear dictate your decisions.
Do your own research, ask questions, and figure out what you believe.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the future of money, whether it's Bitcoin or something else entirely, is something we're all creating together.
I mean, that's a pretty powerful thought.
It is. It means we have a say in how things unfold.
So keep those brains buzzing, folks. This conversation about Bitcoin and the future of finance, it's just getting started.
It's far from over.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin.